Okay, we're talking about the weather, so we should follow the sun, Karen.
Indeed, we should. We should be the sun for the others.
that's a good. That's a good way of starting. So, ah, I love this song. Breathe in the air and set your intentions. Okay. So welcome everyone to Stillness and Chaos. Um, I've got Karen, Isabel from Harvard Business School. I've got Po, who's my
No,
buddy and friend, and who Karen loves. So I'm just going to keep him here. I know you love him.
I
So
know. I should have been taken. Actually, I'll go get mine.
I gotta get yours. Oh gosh, that's hilarious.
Here are my comfort animals. You'll see, they're a little bit more polar oriented, but my also got these things. So they're my companions here at work. They'll keep us company.
Good. All right. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Daniel. I'm the founder of Because You. I truly believe that all of us are wise, joyful, beautiful human beings. And sometimes a mental health issue, emotional distress, grief, whatever it is, kind of clouds who we are as human beings. So it's my life's purpose to kind of firstly work on myself to see who I am as a full human being, but also support others on their journey. So stillness and chaos is one of the ways I do it. Every 2 weeks, I have amazing guests like Karen, and we talk about different themes. But it's really about what's the intersection between well-being and inner leadership, and it's such a cyclical journey, right? And that's a little bit about what we'll talk about today. Today's topic is compassionate management of workplace mental health. So we'll focus a little bit on the workplace, but Karen's written a lot of other stuff in the mental health space, so I'm gonna try and focus a little bit on that as well. People who are here, you can add in comments like this. We can see you. Sometimes we can see your picture if you're dialing from a laptop. So Suresh, hi Suresh, lovely to see you here. So please feel free to share reflections, questions, anything that will help make this conversation a little bit more than just Karen and I speaking. But welcome everyone, and Karen, maybe a quick intro, and then we can kick off. Yeah. Um, so Karen, maybe a professional. You've been 30 years at Harvard Business School. I'm sure in that time done many different things, but at the moment the head of the global research group, lead the case studies department. So lots of different case studies and lots of different topics. But if I get it right, your focus is on the health, organizational management, leadership, that sort of focus, but also with technology. I think, but I'm sure there are lots of other things in your team that you focus on. And I've said that because you love those topics, right? And a lot of the work that you've done, you've written, and I think something that I really appreciate is, you're not just an advocate for mental health, but you bring out these really nuanced perspectives of mental health from different walks of life, right? Whether it's your recent article about the Gen Z and how to not exclude the younger generations, or it's about leaders in the business space, especially from a men's mental health angle, or how do we see in the digital chaos of the world, how do we take care of our mental health? So there are different ways that you're approaching this, and I know you're a DEI kind of an advocate, so there are lots of things about you that I appreciate, and it's such a pleasure to have you on this show. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a joy, and it's wonderful also to be connected. There are people who write about advocates and people who take risks, and then there are people like you who really lead the way in different conversations by being very honest about what it means for them to be bright, shining souls and how hard it sometimes can be. So it's a particular honor to be here with you today. So thank you for having me, and thank you for whoever's with us. Please use the chats. We really want this to be as interactive as possible.
Yeah. Yes. And on that note, I think one of the reasons I started Stillness and Chaos is because I've been on this mental health journey now for almost 12 years, right? And it's been very up and down and everything in between, and it's sometimes felt very chaotic. And for me, I've done so much of work on myself getting help, all of it with the support of my wife, my family, all of it to really feel this inner stillness, even in the chaotic chaos of the world. So that's kind of why I started Stillness and Chaos, and I've kind of named it that way. But I'd love to maybe just start, Karen, by asking you, what does Stillness and Chaos mean to you?
So it's interesting because when you were explaining how you got to the name, what came into my mind is actually they're actually present in my mind as relatively extreme states. So I don't know what the formal definition is, but I can imagine that stillness is sort of calm, motionless, quiet kind of state of mind, whereas chaos is real confusion and sort of an extreme. And it's interesting that that's the name of the show, because I think what we're aiming here is for more of a dynamic equilibrium. So it's something where everything is already in change or flux or something like that, where we have to accept that things change all the time, that things will not be perfectly still or perfectly quiet. But they're also not as chaotic as sometimes I think we want them to be or pretend that they are, or social media wants us to be. So for me, stillness and chaos feels very ambitious and extreme in a way.
Interesting. I mean, what came to mind is almost it feels like a spectrum of not so chaotic, but then extreme chaos, and not so still and quite still, right? And I feel we can plot ourselves in that graph at any point in time. The other thing is, the previous guest, who one of my mentors, he said sometimes we have this assumptions that stillness is good and chaos is bad, and sometimes it may not be that way, right? Actually, having chaos might be very beautiful and creative as well. um,
And that's
so
a big puzzle with, nobody likes change, but our being together here is a product of change. It's a product of technological change, of human change. There are, civilizations or times in which we would have never spoken with each other, and yet here we are, and we are happy about that. But then we still regret the change that brought us here. So, but that's very hard for humans. We tend to like it predictable, and I think the world now feels is important. So incredibly unpredictable. And that's difficult, and that's why we're having these conversations.
Yeah, if you don't mind sort of sharing a couple of moments, maybe one or two, where it's been a little unpredictable for you, or kind of one of the reasons where you started paying attention to mental health. Could be personal, professional, anything that you're happy to share with us.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. So I work at Harvard Business School, as you mentioned. I run a team that supports faculty who write case studies, which is the Socratic method by which the faculty instructs at Harvard Business School and many business schools in the world. We write about people making decisions. And in the course of that work, we write about people usually in a very neutral term. So you would be deciding on a merger. I might be deciding on whether or not to hire somebody. And as I was doing this work for a few decades, I noticed that we were writing very neutrally about these individuals, even if that, decisions are never neutral. They're always coming from a place, operating in a place and in a context for an intent. And I kind of like put that aside on one side of my brain and kept on working. And then when I was relatively young, two of my close relatives died by suicide, took their lives after difficult workplace situations. And then I was wondering, I was like, why are we not talking about these topics more in business schools? Why are we not equipping leaders to engage more in self-reflection, but also think about, what is the nature of the individuals that they are managing, just by force of statistics, that basically that a third of us might be struggling with a mental health condition at any given point in time. And then the question of, is it even something that business should be involved in or not? And what are the barriers and what are the risks? So that work I've done pretty much in parallel. I think you've seen more business schools since then getting more interested in many of the human aspects. You could say that conscious capitalism is a form of making people more aware that business has a great deal of impact. But a lot of these reflections tend to focus on the environment and less on societal impact. So Harvard Business School has started a few years ago a Business and Global Society initiative, where it is thinking about these issues, like, what is the role of business in the broader society and the impact that it has. I think, you mentioned several of the topics that I'm interested in, and they seem pretty random, but I think I really dislike waste. And I feel that we have been wasting a lot of human capital.
Mm.
It hurts my heart because I think there might be different ways of doing it. And part of it has been because we haven't been wanting to talk about topics like we're talking about today, that we've had expectations about how men should be, how leaders should be, that have made it very difficult for people to come forward. So I think that's where I'm coming from
Mm.
personally. I think, I'm also half French, half German, very, very different families. I never fit in. When I was in France, everybody said I looked like a German peasant. When I was in Germany, they were like, "What's up with the scarves?" It's not that cold when you wear earrings,
Yeah.
and it's hard. It's lonely. It's painful not to fit in, and so I think I'm trying to think of ways to build organizations that exclude less.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? How kind of um, personal experiences of in your case maybe not fitting in or feeling excluded or seeing your relatives kind of your close relatives die by suicide, which my condolences. I think that kind of it shapes us in such conscious and unconscious ways, that you've kind of almost directed part of your life and your work towards this kind of this space.
Mhm.
And I think that's so true, for all of us in some way or form, if you pay attention to it.
I think it also can be very risky, and it's something that we wrote about in the book, which is because we're all shaped by our experience.
Mm.
It takes some self-discipline to remember that our experiences are absolutely unique.
Mm.
So you're seeing, for example, as a manager, if somebody comes to you with a difficult, let's say, caregiving situation. Um, I was a caregiver to my parents for a whole host of reasons, in part personality.
Yeah.
I thought it was all right to see my parents die. And it was a joy to accompany them in death. And so I might actually be a very unhelpful manager or individual to somebody who is a caregiver because I haven't experienced the pain that they might be experiencing.
Mm.
So I think all of us who are bringing our lived experience to these topics at work, a very good place to start is just by a self-reflection around what this actually might present for others. So it is doing research. And the list is long. It can be a miscarriage. It can be, the loss of a job. We all react very differently. And yet
Mm.
we're trying to support others as if our experience were universal.
Mm. Yeah, and if I could ask, let's take an example, right? So suppose this person has come in quite an overwhelmed state. They're taking care of their father who's had cancer, whatever it is. You're bringing in that overwhelm into the workplace. Um, I understand. I get I don't feel it. I don't understand it because I'm not a caregiver. But how might this manager then, support that person?
So I think that the very first, the role of so first it's important for a manager to create a space where the individual would actually come forward. So, when you read the statistics, especially around caregiving, most of us don't tell our employers that we are,
Mm.
caring for others because we might be worried that there would be sanctions, that we might not be promoted because the manager would say, well, they have a lot going on in their life. So I think setting the stage where maybe a manager is open about their caregiving responsibilities. There's a lot of role modeling, creating a place where you want people to come forward if there's anything that they need. Recently we did a piece on emotional maturity and parenting, and we asked a 13-year-old, I said, what are the hallmarks of a good parent?
Mm.
And he immediately responded. He said that they're willing to help. And
Mm.
so I think signaling, you're willing to help. You may not be able to. Hopefully you're in an environment that provides some resources. So I'm very, very blessed to have very, very supportive bosses over the years.
Yeah.
I work in a big structure. There are resources. If you're in a startup, it's very different.
Yeah.
But usually there are some resource, there's some ways to think about it. And creating a space where the person has the ability to talk things through about how this impacts their work. What are some accommodations that could be done? So maybe the person needs to get up in the night to tend to, a parent who may be suffering from cognitive impairment and is up at night.
Yeah.
Can you maybe come up with an arrangement that they will start their work late a little bit later? So I think there's a lot of things that can be done that can enable the individuals to stay in the workplace.
Yeah. And that's
What happens is that people have to then make a choice. And you saw it in the pandemic when we lost a lot of women talent because people had to be forced to choose one role versus the other. The final one is that often when we are caregivers, we're learning skills that are actually very important to the workplace, which is things change, things are out of control. You need to be more organized, you need to marshal resources. And so employees who have been in caregiving roles might also be displaying really very, very good traits for the workplace. And so making them feel that what they're learning in their personal journeys, however painful it may be, is never a negative to the workplace if it can be accommodated. It could actually be a positive. And maybe they will emerge with more compassion and empathy also.
yeah. I love that on so many levels, especially that last piece, right? Because we don't think of that usually. We kind of say, yes, we're dealing with a difficult thing, but actually, it's just my thing which I'm dealing with. Is it actually a strength back in the workplace? Hell yeah, right?
Yes.
Like that empathy, that fact that you're caring for another person, the fact that you can actually, being a caregiver is actually really difficult, right? Because you kind of have to multitask and do a million things.
Yes.
And I think and that appreciation from the manager, whoever it is beautiful. But what I'm kind of seeing is kind of from a system lens. How does the organization create the structure for the person to? And caregiving is just one example we've taken, but it could be anything.
Yes.
From the manager lens, how do you lead by example? How do you create the space? And then the manager themselves individually, how do you show up? Right? And I think this is interesting. Even though you said I may not have the caregiving experience, actually that doesn't matter in some cases. Of course, it matters sometimes, but I feel what you have felt, whether in terms of the feeling, the emotion. I have felt that emotion in some way or form. And I think if we connect on that level, that is a first basic human level that we can connect on. Right. So
Yes.
sometimes I hear this and it's very true that we don't have the skills to deal with it. Yes, we don't in extreme cases, but in most cases actually we do.
I
Because
think
it's
so. And
a very human level. Yeah.
yes. And also, one of the nice things about the just our access to technology is that you can educate yourself. And so, for most things, there are some resources, there are a lot of best practices out there. And, the inflection points are really important. These are also things that managers can watch out for. So inflection points tend to be places where if we have underlying mental health conditions, they may become difficult to manage. So these inflection points can be, we tend to think of, divorce, death of a loved one, layoffs, but they can also be promotions where all at once, you're no longer friends with your peers, you're managing them. It can be marriage, which is very stressful. It can be very good, but there's a change of identity. There's going to be a shift, parenting. So these are places where I think managers can also particularly look out for their reports and also their colleagues and their bosses. We should all be looking up too, because how bosses feel impact us tremendously.
Yeah.
And those are good places to check in and say, how you doing? Is there anything that, we need to think about? Maybe praise a little bit more. Understand that all these difficult renegotiations are happening. I think one place that is really under discussed in the workplace is grief. Because with a lot of these changes in stages, we experience loss. Parenting is a loss of independence in a way. When we lose our loved ones, the companies say, here, take 3 days and then come back as if nothing had changed. So at the system level, I think there's a lot more that companies could do to create a little bit more space for people to go through these cycles of grief.
And it's difficult at the same time, right? Coming back to your point of should businesses, is that the business of the business in some ways? Um,
So the business of business is to make money
yeah,
or to be sustainable. And having people at work who have not properly grieved,
yeah,
you will pay for it somewhere. So the
yeah,
question is, do you wish at which juncture do you wish to bear the cost? So you see a lot of externalization of costs, which is I'm going to burn through you, like in the consulting
yeah,
companies,
yeah, yeah.
and then you can go off and I'll do something else. But not giving a person, unresolved grief is extremely complicated.
Mm,
And the chances of some of us dealing with the loss of a loved one, a loss of an unborn child, is really important at work. And I tell you, my employer is a really phenomenal employer. We have 3 days bereavement leave just for close family members, which
wow.
means if my boyfriend of a long time passes away, if my step grandmother passes away. So I think that's a place where we could have a lot more compassion. Death and taxes are inevitable, but the workplace still operates as if a death weren't. So I think that's an area of opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. So many places of opportunity. So you were the co-author of a book called Compassionate Management of Mental Health Issues in the Modern Workplace,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we've talked a little bit about it. I feel through what we've said. Are there a couple of other things that because you use the word compassionate management, which is quite you're putting a stake in the ground in some ways. Just share a little bit more behind that and what you've uncovered.
So when we started researching the book, it's nearly maybe 8 years ago. And at the time, this sort of pairing of compassion and leadership was coming in the works. But it's, there's been more and more conversation around empathetic management, pro-social leadership, and all this, especially since COVID. At the time, actually, when we proposed the title, there was a little bit of a pushback on, was it really the right term? And should it be empathetic management? So in our minds, the difference between empathy and compassion is, I think empathy is much more about feelings. So my ability to feel what you feel,
Yeah.
personally, I find that extremely complicated. And it might be just my predilection, but unless you tell me how you feel, it's difficult for me to project onto you how I think you might be feeling.
Right.
But compassion is more about actions. And so even if I do not know how you feel, if I'm in a place where I can understand the situation that you're in, I can behave in a compassionate way, which is if you let me know that you're having difficulty, my saying, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, and that's the worst thing, and that's so terrible. You're so anxious. Oh yeah, the world is coming to an end." That may be empathetic, but that's not going to help you much. It might actually make things worse. Compassion is, you're feeling anxious. Let's discuss 2 or 3 things concretely that I can do, if I can, that may be in my power to reduce the stresses on you that may be causing anxiety. So the book is about, and it starts with the self. So a little bit like the arc of our conversation, which is, who are you to being a manager? Who are you to managing yourself and others? What is your impact on your immediate sort of team? And compassion management includes, thinking about how do you set up teams? Where should the people sit? This is before the pandemic, but rarely do we think about how people are sitting. For individuals who have neurodiversity, it can be extremely stressful to be in a cubicle space.
Right.
It can be extremely distracting for some of us to be close to an elevator bank. So I think compassion is a systematic reflection of what are the possible actions you can take as a manager to enable the individual's human capital to not be wasted at work. That might be how I would summarize it.
Right. Yeah, and I think it comes back to the reason I started this, which is there's such a great link between this work, the mental health work, with the inner work of leadership, with then
Absolutely.
how it kind of manifests in the outer world. In this case, as a manager, as a leader out there, right? And what you talked about, I like the compassionate, like it's a do something about it, and um, I feel there are so many steps before that as well, right? It's kind of like I will feel the compassion for someone else when, yeah, I guess it's a little bit of a mix of an empathy and a compassion. So I think it's there's a lot of work to be done internally first as well. To
Absolutely. And it's, there's a lot of discipline also. And I think one of the challenges with bringing all these social issues into the workplace is that then there are many more emotions. So there've always been emotions, but they've kind of been, subterranean. But then, both parties need to show emotional maturity, which is, the reality that you can't always get what you want. Things don't always work the way you want. You will need to give space to other people. Without that, then it becomes really a party of people fighting for their accommodations and their rights. And I think the big challenge that business now has is if you have a culture where you claim that you really want to be supportive of everyone and accommodate everyone, then you need to educate everybody in the organization to accept that. Because if not, what happens is that I will get a dispensation for, let's say, a medical condition, a mental health leave. My manager cannot reveal why I'm out.
yeah,
That would be in the US, a HIPAA violation, and it's also just fundamentally not good. But you won't know that. So you'll be like, why is Carin not here? Why does she get to start at 10, and I have to be here at 7? So it's a real culture change, and that needs to occur.
And this is, I mean, this is happening in India as well. I know, it's, I feel we've gone from a generation of businesses not caring at all to now there being a spectrum where I still feel a large chunk is kind of still in that bucket. There are large chunk which are on the other side, who really care and who are literally facing this dilemma, which is we want to do all this, and it's kind of difficult to accommodate everyone. And there are people in the middle who are kind of going through this phase. I know you said you're really being thoughtful about the mental health space, the employee mental health space right now, and the way it's going the DEI way. So just share a little bit about that.
So I think in both places, there's been the similar playbook, which is racism and mental health have been around, probably since humans sort of started to make sense of their world. But businesses, pretended for a long time that it wasn't their affair. They didn't have to sort of do anything. They didn't have to be agents of change. And then both of these issues, even though people like us try to raise these topics before COVID and the murder of George Floyd and many others by the police in the U.S., they weren't discussed really, because we're like, well, we can't talk about it. And even when we wrote the book, people were like, well, we're not therapists, we're not psychologists. I was like, this is not the place we're coming from. We're coming from a place of this is a business risk that should be managed. This is a business opportunity that can be leveraged, and then you can look at this as a neutral topic, and then get the subject matter experts to make sure we do things properly. So that was the vantage point. So in both of these, you've seen businesses panic a little bit. And I think this is also where social media and the news cycle is tricky, is, everything just gets out so much. So things happen and organizations say we have to do and say something. So in both of these spaces, they did and said something, we really care. Then, there was a lot of recruiting of consultants who, all at once, everybody was a diversity and equity consultant on LinkedIn. We've all been there. Now everybody's a well-being person. So, you see these industries sort of popping up, and then people were trained. So in DI, we all went to training. In mental health, there was a lot of emails about self-care, emails about mental health apps. Most of them are not really tested. And then, it was like, oh, go back to business as usual. And so the middle managers were told, you have to sort of drive inclusion, hire different kinds of workers, treat your workers differently. We're not going to really train you on what this actually means for you as a middle manager. And oh, by the way, the world is coming to an end. So you'll have to sell, that many toothbrushes next year. Good luck. And it didn't work. And you see the attrition in middle managers. The DEI, actually, the inclusion and the stats are worse than they used to be. On mental health, we haven't moved the dial despite all of these investments. And I think what's happened now is that business need to rebuild the trust, some of the trust that they have lost with their individuals. And I think that especially in the mental health area, we haven't seen any leaders really come forward. You think of all the athletes. The Olympics were basically most of the news coverage on athletes, and my news feed is skewed, but starting with Phelps, about whom we wrote, Vladimir Klitschko, we wrote about him also, Simone Biles, Naomi Osaka, several tennis players, Stefan Zverev. A lot of people have talked about the stress of performance. But we haven't really seen any leaders come forward.
In the business world, you mean?
In the business world, and but even in the political world. So, the Prime Minister of New Zealand resigned, but then 6 months later she was in another job, and didn't pick up the topics and all that. So I think there's a real opportunity here for business leaders to come forward and say there is a real trade-off at the moment between health and performance and success. Can we think of this differently? So I don't know where these leaders are. And, we also make it really hard for leaders to come forward because we punish them. If somebody feels weak, we're still conditioned to have our leaders as superheroes. 90% of Fortune 500 CEOs are men. We expect them to behave a certain way. We have these notions of what it's like to be powerful. And that's going to take a long time to change, I think.
Gosh, so much. I'm hearing this a lot as well, right? So the middle managers, they've suddenly been in this now space, don't really know what to do. Like I'm hearing a lot of, this is another training that we need to attend when we've got a million things. So it's just it's kind of becoming a task.
Yes. And if you don't do well, you wind up on TikTok, being made fun of.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's very, very difficult.
Yeah. So where do you go from there? Like, I feel we're talking a lot about the challenges, and it feels very heavy, right? But like part of me wonders again is what you talked about, the open communication, that creating the space, firstly creating the safety and the trust within your own ecosystem to say, okay, you know what, I'm struggling with this, something's happening, I want to tell my manager about it. That's a big piece of work that needs to happen. The second, obviously the system may or may not change, but let's keep that out. And the third, which I feel really strongly about, is the inner work that the manager needs to do. Right? In this situation, how do I come into a place where I am still, or I not still, I am a little bit more stable, where I can take a pause and I can kind of give a pause to the other person, saying, I hear you, I understand, I'm with you, kind of like let's talk a little bit about it, like almost hear them out a little bit. Right. And then the first thing that comes is usually, this is what has happened, this is what has happened, this is what, and it's a kind of very overwhelming for the manager.
Yes.
So one of my again, a suggestion that someone said is, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this. When something comes with you like that, you can say, I'm taking it in, I hear you, I can feel it, and at the same time, this is how you're making me feel. That I'm now feeling a little anxious about my job and your job, and the fact that we've got this report due. And I don't know if that might escalate it or that might help, but that's something I've been thinking about as well.
Yeah,
it's how you're feeling when someone comes.
Yes, yes. I think the notion that managers and leaders are people too is an important one. Number one. I think number two is, we all want to combat climate change, but we all want to fly and order on Amazon. Everybody's going to have to give a little bit, and I think We end our book with Mental Health for All and by All, which is actually I think an Indian psychologist, or I'll find the name, I'm blanking on it, but where he says basically this is if we do want to drive better mental health in a society, everybody's got to be involved. And, being polarized politically doesn't help. Setting expectations on kids that they cannot meet doesn't help. So we're all complicit somehow in this system. So that's the heavy side, to use your adjective. But that's also the bright side, because I think people are becoming more aware of this.
Yeah.
The other very bright side is, my generation is transitioning out of the workplace. And we build these organizations. And, in the recent piece with Fast Company, we called ourselves the icebergs, right? So we were trained to look very different above the surface than under the surface. I think younger generations are calling bullshit on this and saying, this is not who I am. This is not how I operate. And if they're able to take responsibility and accept some of the consequences of building more compassionate workplaces, which might be lower salaries because there might be less productivity, or there might be more productivity. It might be more acceptance that in order to support others, you might have to give something up yourself. Then I think we have a real possibility to do things better. It doesn't have to be heavy, Daniel.
Yeah.
I think the new generation is a real chance here to undo what we did.
Yeah. No, I hear you. And the only reason I do this work is because I see the light in all
of course. Yes. No, of course.
And I think it's at multiple levels, right? So you talked about the new generation, but I think, I'm a young parent, and I feel the way I'm raising my child is probably very different than I was raised. Because I'm a lot more conscious in some ways. And I think, irrespective of, and I think that's just a multiplier effect, right? And I loved how you said we might have to give up something to see the compassionate workplaces that we have.
Yes.
Right? And I think doing that from a young age is just going to have a multiplier effect.
Yes, and I got excellent feedback from my daughter over the summer when we were having this conversation around parenting, when we were doing the research of the similarities between parenting and management. She says, I wish you had occasionally told me you pretended to be okay when you came home, but I knew you weren't. I don't know her real words. This is sort of what it brought up in me. And she said, it would have helped me if you had just come out and said, I had a really bad day today. Can you please just give me 5 minutes?
Yeah.
And sort of to build that trust that then would enable me to sort of have felt more secure in sort of saying, I really had a shitty day. Sorry, I don't know if you're supposed to swear on LinkedIn.
But you can use anything.
We already did, so we might as well double down or triple down. And, she would have seen me as a person with whom she could have come forward to say, please don't yell at me today. I had a really shitty day. And I wasn't able to do that with my kid. And I thought that was very good feedback. I think maybe for parents. The problem is, individual people play all kinds of games, of course. So the con of a new generation that is very versed in psychological terms is that they'll immediately figure out the triangulation techniques, and then they'll shift from being prosecutor to victim. So that's the con. But at least we're having a vocabulary, I think, where we can address these things.
Yeah, I've heard this as well from the taking advantage of, and everything is about, this is my identity, or kind of questioning my identity, and sometimes you got to kind of have that balance.
Yes. And I really liked your example of your other guests about, if somebody says, well, this is how you made me feel, when I said this, and I said, well, this is I'm coming through this with a whole host of feelings also, and back to accepting that leaders and managers have feelings. And I think it's not a bad idea to occasionally ask your manager, how are you doing? And is there anything that I can help you to do your job better? So ask what the manager can do for you, but ask what you can do for your manager. Will make your life easier downstream also.
Yeah. That sounds like the title of a book, no? Ask not what you can. That may be your next book.
No, so many very talented people are writing books that we don't read it.
No, I like that, right? Because it's kind of, it's that acknowledgement that the other person also is feeling something. Your question, your thing about what your daughter. I remember once I was in the car driving my daughter, and I remember it was my dad's anniversary, so I was listening to his songs, and I had tears in my eyes. And then suddenly I looked at her, and I was like, oh no, I can't see her. Let her see me crying. And
Mm.
and then I was like, you know what? Wait,
Yes.
let her see me crying, because this is
Yes.
who I am. And so I had this. I was like really tearing up, and she just looked at me and she said, what's happening?" And she said, I'm just thinking of my dad. It's his thing, so I'm really missing him." And you know what she said to me? She was like 3.5 years old. She just paused and she said, "But I'm here, Dada. I'm here for you." Right? It's crazy. So it's almost like feeling the goosebumps. Yeah.
No, but literally, what is happening? I'm here for you.
Yeah. And sometimes the I guess the insight from that is sometimes whether it's the children, where we kind of say, no, you're this young little thing, I don't want to show my emotion. Obviously there's a balance, you don't want to show way too much, but more often than not, they are very wise. They're just old souls in this child's body, right? And also, as a manager, someone who you're working with, we sometimes don't give enough benefit of the doubt to that person to kind of handle that emotion, and which is
Yes.
probably why we are so, we have those masks and the
Yes.
tough exterior.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's also where these sort of self-reflection comes in, which is, is your intention just to solve the problem in order to just get it out of the way? Because that's all, and everybody is stressed, right? So we're being wired to just like check off to-do lists, and you
Hmm.
wind up sort of checking off humans as if they were to-do lists, which is, deal with this person, done, on to the next one.
Hmm.
Which of course we have to do in order to get there, but this is not how. Sometimes it takes a little bit more time. And
Yeah.
sometimes it takes very little, and just acknowledging that you're there for the other. What's happening? I'm there for you. I'll remember that.
Hmm. My mind went somewhere. I think it goes back. It's almost a spiritual, like this. What we are speaking about, right? Of looking at a person as a resource, as kind of disconnected from you. Um, like, one of the biggest reasons why we are in this crisis of mental health is disconnection, right? We
Yes.
are disconnected from our bodies. We are
Hmm.
disconnected from the other person, and that's one of the biggest reasons. Like, it's, you kind of put it
Yes.
down in that box. That's what it is. And the moment, like, and all spiritual teachings tell us this, that all of us are interconnected,
Hmm.
right? All of us. So when someone else is suffering, you are suffering, and unless that person doesn't feel better, you are not going to feel better,
Hmm.
right? And I know that's like, it might be too philosophical or too woo-woo for the business world, but like, I feel like I feel that's something very powerful, that um, I don't know, if once people internalize it, then stuff at the workplace kind of becomes a little better.
Yeah, I think this, there's been a lot in the US written about, and even our Surgeon General has declared loneliness a national epidemic. And I think the
Mm,
the place where we used to come together, who are communities of faith, sports association, neighborhoods, even families. Many more of us are single parent households. There we have just fewer natural connections, and so the workplace becomes a place where we're seeking belonging, we are seeking purpose, we're seeking all these terms that actually highly religious passion. Those are highly at least from my Christian
yeah,
background, those are
yeah.
relatively religious terms. The mission of an organization.
Mm,
Work is work, and I think passion and purpose, we can find somewhere else. We can bring it to work, but trying to find it there, I think, has also contributed to this crisis of disappointment or disengagement. In the Christian practice, it's peace be with you, and also with you.
mm,
So this reciprocity of I wish peace onto you, but I expect you to wish it back to me. So even this notion of communion and reciprocity, I agree, is very prominent, at least in my in my area of the spiritual world.
Yeah. Yeah. Oof. Okay.
We
How are
should
you
say
feeling?
that your next guest should be a child. I think it would be just phenomenal because they know so much more than we do,
Oh gosh.
intellectualize everything, and they just,
Yeah. I
so
love that.
yes,
That's not a bad idea actually.
yes. And they'll swear less than I swear, so that would be good too.
Okay. Let's see. Santosh, good discussion related to the human connection, required interactions with others. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Um, Suresh says, how a manager strikes balance. Yeah, this is a multi-million dollar question. Um,
Yes,
and maybe connected to that, I think this kind of goes a little bit, but maybe different, but also any inputs on self-compassion.
yes. So I think they're quite related, which is,
Yeah,
there's only that much that you can do and that much that you can control. And I think one thing that might be happening to managers who try to be too empathetic, or to let's stick with empathetic as a term for the moment,
yeah,
which is there is a line between empathetic concern, which is you're exhibiting a change in behavior, you're late on your deadlines, you seem disheveled, or there's a physical change in your presentation, which might be signaling that you are dealing with something. What is it that I can do? And then there is empathetic contagion, which is you're looking really disheveled. You have told me you've gone through a divorce. I had a horrible divorce. And as a manager, I will start to relive all of this and try to give you advice and think that I can fix that problem for you. That then can lead to a form of burnout because you're being too close to your employee in order to actually manage them. That then takes up too much time. That makes it then a lot harder to manage all the other tasks and target. That being said, I think a good conversation for middle managers, if it's possible to have with top managers, is that if you want to drive all these social imperatives in the workplace, and if you want me to be supportive, what will you do to help me? In order to become better at managing this. And it might not be another training, but it might be access to a coach or something like that. But I think these are the fundamental tensions of parenting also. Um, Set expectations, make sure that people can meet them, make sure to find a place where they can tell you if they're having difficulties meeting them, acknowledge issues when they show up as soon as
yeah,
possible, and then praise where appropriate.
yeah. And I think where the system is breaking down is you kind of leave the mental health stuff to a training or to an external person or to
Yes,
whatever,
yes,
right? And you know, like 75% of all mental health issues that people are facing at the workplace, if you get really good management practices in place at all levels, like I feel that there's a lot that will just help that person, like be okay. And of course the stuff that's coming from outside, that's coming in, that's okay. But there's a big role that management practices have as well, right? Whether it's the targets, whether it's kind of the different spaces you have, like just from a systemic lens, it's so important. Otherwise, the managers are kind of left on their own.
yes. So, mental health conditions are health conditions. So I think the workplace can contribute to making them worse and can help individuals manage them better. I don't think that the workplace doesn't have an effect on prostate cancer, for example, or so. So to me, in my world, they're very separate issues. It is just the individual is presenting at work with a
Yeah,
certain set of challenges. Some of them are health challenges. It is my job as a manager to try to make them as productive as possible and as happy we might turn. I mean, only a third of people are engaged at work, and it's been that way for decades. um
mm,
and that's the puzzle, I think, of the moment.
yeah.
Thank you so
And
much
that,
for the questions, and I think the self-compassion is super
yeah.
important. There are so many.
Anyone else who's there, please feel free to share questions. We're going to
Yeah,
wrap
and
up there.
also please I'm on LinkedIn or on Medium. Please reach out to me.
Yeah.
I'm a lot better in the written form than on screen, so please connect.
No one will agree with you on that, but okay.
No,
Um,
and
any inputs on self compassion?
So part of self-compassion is a reduction of expectations of oneself, which is, we are not superheroes. I mean, back to superheroic, maybe some of us are, but most of us are just humans trying to get through the day. And, then I think one of the senses that often comes up with self-compassion is, talk to yourself as you would to a friend.
Yeah.
And most of us don't tell our friends, what a complete idiot you are. I cannot believe you didn't sell stocks before Monday. You'll never amount to anything. I think that's a good practice. So I don't have much internal dialogue, but sometimes I do. And then I try to say, you could have done this better if you had taken the time to focus. So maybe next time do it a little bit better. So, self-compassion is a little bit also what you see in, I don't know, Suresh, if you've read The Inner Game, which was somebody who plays tennis, which is, if you miss a point, you have the choice in saying, I'll never score another point, or to say, why did I miss that point?
Yeah.
The point is gone. Can I go somewhere else? So there's an action component to this, to self-compassion. It's hard. I think being self-compassionate is also not engaging in behaviors that make your life worse, which is doom scrolling. People are being so mean to each other. We're literally like touching hot surfaces all the time, going, ouch, ouch, ouch. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah. And if I could add a layer, when I think of self-compassion, something that comes up for me is always like, it's always trying to get better at something. Or I'm like, no, I wish I was better. And especially being on this mental health journey, I feel, it's a constant back and forth, right? I go 2 steps forward, 3 steps backward, and I'm like, I can't believe I'm here already. So what I've kind of worked with is almost saying, what, this part of me is just one part of me. I might be this way today, or whatever it might be, like this emotion is all the emotions that are part of me, right? But
Yes,
there are other parts of me which are actually amazing and beautiful, and sometimes, let's not forget everything else,
yeah,
and sort of take this part and kind of blow it up.
yeah.
um,
The emotions are data. I think, like suppressing our emotions is also not good, because this is how the body is communicating to us. I think also it's important to remember, now with these conversations around mental health that have tended to focus on sort of the symptoms that tend to be negative symptoms. One form of self-compassion can also be to say, I am a distracted person, or I'm diagnosed bipolar, which are really, really difficult conditions to manage. They can be managed, but they're extremely difficult to manage. Or I have ADHD, which can be very debilitating. But, a lot of companies have been founded and are being led by individuals who have a certain type of brain chemistry, a certain type of lived experience that have enabled them to do really extraordinary things for a lot of people, and to do make other people's lives much better. Doctors present with a whole host of mental health conditions. So our mental health is part of who we are, and part of the joy, the creation, the compassion, as well as the destruction that we bring into the world. So I always like to be reminded of this as part of self-compassion. Look at the athletes. A lot of their pathologies enable them to have 28 Olympic medals. So they're not our super weaknesses. Now the conversation has made it to be, the current vernacular has made it to be.
I'm smiling because I feel, like, and a lot of people know. So I was diagnosed with having bipolar many, many years ago, which is why I'm doing the work I'm doing. And I feel for a long time I did take it as a huge weakness, right? And at a certain point, I started to see that because of all this work that I've been doing on myself and taking help and so on, I can see how which is why I love this work that I do, right? Because when you really work on this, it just unleashes something that is beautiful and creative and joyful and wise.
Mhm.
And that is this potential that, you go back to that human capital you were talking about right in the beginning. Like, that is what is needed, right?
Mhm.
Because when you do that, there's so much joy in the world. I
Yes,
feel, and so much creativity.
yes,
Um, so,
and,
so
and
I
we want
totally resonated when you say, take it from the weakness to then move it the other side. I can see that. Yeah. Thank
right.
you.
You wouldn't want me as a surgeon. I'd be in the operating room and I'll be like, oh, I wonder why the scalpel is here. Oh, and I like the blue. Nobody would survive. But if you put a surgeon in my line of work, where every day we manage, we produce like we help 500 pieces of material every day is different. Everything is always in flux.
Mm,
She would have had a very hard time in my job.
mm,
I cannot do her job. And so we also, when we're blessed to be in professions that enabled us to remain as healthy as possible, being
mm.
our original total whatever self, I think that's a great blessing. So I feel very fortunate.
Lovely. I see this is a private chat to me, but I'll just read it out. So you say, great to be here, Suresh and Santosh. Thank you for your questions.
Oh yes,
Uh,
I meant to thank our participants or our
no,
questions.
that's fine. There's no chat function. Okay, so we're going to wrap up. Anyone else wants to say something nice? This is the time to say it. Or a quick
We're
question.
not nice. We
Um,
take all feedback.
that's fine, but say something nice. So if I could go back to you personally, Karen, what's an ambition? Okay, let me ask you the first one first. Like, what's a challenge? What are you struggling with at the moment, if you don't mind me asking?
Hmm. Why do I don't. I'm pretty happy-go-lucky. What do I struggle with? So there are many more things that I would like to learn and be good at than I can. But I don't see it as a struggle. I see it as a great privilege and joy. Um, I'm not struggling about getting old, but I
Mm,
did just see my very first boyfriend, whom I hadn't seen in 32 years. And it really took me for a spin.
mm,
So now I'm like, wow, 32 years have passed. So now in this moment, I'm a little bit like, wow, where did the time go? Um,
yeah,
so a little bit of melancholy, maybe.
yeah, I hear
Maybe.
you.
Yeah, yeah. But it's okay. Emotions are data. We'll just take it. It's nice to have been with you. I really appreciated the conversation. I so appreciate being in touch with you all the time. I've learned a lot from you and from what you
Right,
represent, the possibilities you set out. And yeah, so thank you so much.
right.
Aparna, thank you for your comment.
Pagna, thank you so much. Pagna is an amazing advocate as well. Um, all right, so thank you so much, Karen. I've loved this freewheeling conversation, which is what we kind of had in mind. And yeah, I think there's so much that resonates, which I don't want to kind of summarize. But thank you for the work that you're doing. I think having someone like you in the position that you are, just churning out these incredible amounts of material and research and perspectives, just gives a lot of foundation and kind of strength to the to this work. And especially when you add the leadership lens, the mental health lens, the workplace lens. So I know, like, I know this, but your body of work is incredibly needed in this world, and
Well,
I'm just
I so appreciate, and I really appreciate your sharing these feelings with me. Thank you so much, and thank you to your audience and everybody. Take good care. Be self compassionate and compassionate to others, and we'll meet again soon.
all right. Thanks so much,
Bye.
Karen. Just wait for 2 minutes. Yeah. All right. Bye.